start this morning is with the first paragraph, which I'd like to read to you, that opens this insight today. So Mike says, ego has a number of definitions and descriptions. It is a false sense of self. It is a sense of identity which is not true. It is an identity created by and within the spiritual energy referred to as the self, the soul, the spirit, when we identify with something that we are not. Ego is, to borrow a phrase from New Scotland Yard, simply a case of mistaken identity. Or, in one single word, it is simply a mistake. Here is a slightly longer description. It also contains the mechanism by which we create an ego. Ego is the attachment to and identification with an image, an idea, a concept, a belief in your mind. So that's very interesting, isn't it? And, we often hear this expression, oh, it's all in your mind. But to what extent do we actually take that as reality? If you think about the beliefs that we create, these are in the mind. And very often our beliefs are enormously limiting. And also, very often, the cause of a lot of our pain and suffering. Just because we create a belief about ourselves, about the world, about people. And so today we will start to see this deep connection between how we create the ego and all the negative emotions that we come into on a day-to-day basis. Little things happening. And before you know it, you're upset, you're hurt, you're discontent about something. So let's explore and give some examples, and let's try and see, because, the creation of the ego is a subtle thing. It's not something that, is obvious to us. In fact, we often say that everyone sees the ego in us before we do. So most of the time people are referring to someone with arrogance, but it's very important that we begin to understand ego as something much more than simply arrogance. It is misidentification. So what happens in our lives is we learn to believe in an idea that we create in our minds. This is how the image starts. So we start to create within our minds an image. And the extraordinary thing is that the real self, this is the self that we are exploring, trying to uncover, that real self doesn't have an image. It is without an image. And that's quite something to think about. If you think about the true self, that inner consciousness that is who I am. It is without an image. But what we do is we create this image as we're growing up, and then we learn to project that image of ourselves out into the world. And we don't realize that this is the start of all our stress, our tension, our struggles, and our unhappiness, basically. Because the reality is that the self is not a belief. And when we create a belief about ourselves, self-belief, at the same time, we don't realize we are also creating something else, and that is self-doubt. If you have self-belief, you will also have self-doubt. And I think we all know what that feels like. It's such an uncomfortable experience when we doubt ourselves. So Mike uses this very powerful metaphor of going to the movies, and something that we can all identify with. Now just think, I don't know, the last time you went to a movie, maybe it was a very long time ago, but even if it's in your own home, at the beginning of the movie, when you sit down, you are aware of where you are sitting. You're aware of the environment, maybe the cinema or your lounge. You're aware of that. But what happens very quickly as you are watching the screen that is in front of you, you begin to create this movie in your own mind. So yes, it's reflected on the screen in front of you, but what is happening in the mind? This is very interesting. So what happens generally with us is we begin to identify with one of the characters. Could be the hero, that could be any one of the characters, but we begin to identify with that character. And before we know it, we have created that screen, not in front of our physical eyes, but internally in the mind. And then we, because we identify with that particular character, what is the next thing that happens? And this happens all the time. We notice that when that character is going through something and it creates either fear or joy or hurt, what happens to us? That screen that we've created internally in our own world stimulates the same emotion within us. And we've all seen people even get angry while watching a movie because they have identified with something that's happening to the characters in the movie. But all of it is not out there. It's happening in here. So this is important for us because then we start to realize that in real life, the emotions that we feel, we create internally. So yes, we do get triggers, and those triggers then create this image internally, and then the negative emotions follow. So just to go back to the analogy of the movie, when we say that, we come out of the movie and we say, oh, that movie really moved me. Actually, Mike says, the movie didn't move you. You moved yourself because you identified with a character. You become attached to that character. And then the emotions, whatever is happening to that character, those emotions emerge within us. And sometimes they're taken to the extreme. You've heard of people meeting an actor in the street and punching them or shouting at them because they've identified so deeply with perhaps someone in the movie that they treated badly. So this is the extraordinary thing that happens to us. Now, let's take the example of what's happening when we watch a movie into a real life example. And we have many different scenarios, but let's just think of one. Let's say you have a beautiful white carpet in your sitting room, and you're very fond of your carpet, and it's very much part of the image that you've created for yourself. And one day a friend comes to visit, and the carpet is new, and what happens is he spills coffee on the carpet, and you just react, and you say, can't you be more careful? Or you should be more careful. And what has happened in that split moment, it's as if you are the carpet. So how does that happen? So you create this image of the carpet, this lovely white carpet. You identify with it. You become attached to it. And then when something happens to the carpet, it's as if it happens to you. Let's take another example. We've all seen this happen, that someone knocks someone else's car and he gets out of the car in a rage, as if not the car has been knocked, as if he has been knocked. We see it in road rage, when someone cuts someone else off and they go after that car with so much anger, pull them off the road, and very often, will beat them up. This is what happens in road rage. So we can start to see how all we have to do is start to identify with something, someone, can be even an idea. As soon as we identify ourselves with that, we become attached to it, to how it should be, or how they should be, how they should treat me. And then when it doesn't happen, the emotion comes. Actually, we can see that when we create these egos, which we do constantly during the day, it becomes like a minefield for emotions. So you might think, well, we should then be detached from everything. And actually, detachment or non-attachment is something very interesting, because we might tend to feel that, well, that means you don't care. And actually, it couldn't be further from the truth. The problem is that when we're emotional, we think that that's how we show that we care. But in actual fact, if we were able to be detached from the carpet, doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. But if something happens to that white carpet, instead of losing ourselves at that moment, getting upset, and then possibly even spoiling a relationship, because there isn't the emotion, we are in that state of detachment, we are able to do the right thing with clarity. And this applies to the carpet, applies to the person who knocked your car, or whatever it is. I mean, sometimes it's people, other people who get hurt, and then we get all emotional because we identify and we're attached to them. But if we are detached, then we can start to respond in an appropriate way, in an accurate way. We can give the right kind of care. We can respond in an appropriate way, because our feelings haven't just carried us away. So there's another quote from the book which I found quite interesting on this aspect of non-attachment. I'll just find the quote. Any kind of attachment means you are trapped in the image of the object of attachment in your own mind. It's impossible to be happy and content, loving and joyful, unless you are free within your being. Hence the long line of sages and saints, mystics and gurus, who have all expounded on the great mistake of attachment and the necessity to cultivate a relationship of non-attachment with everything. So, detachment. I just found in my life that when I've been able to pause and separate myself from the situation, then in that moment, that is when clarity comes. And it gives us that couple of seconds to respond appropriately. And I was thinking about Shuna's story earlier, when I was with her and she was waiting for the results of the COVID test. And there was such a fine line, of how things needed to happen. But I saw within her, she was doing everything necessary, but there was detachment. In other words, if this happens, it will be good. And if this doesn't happen, it will still be good. That means non-attachment. So, so important for us. So today, as we go along our busy lives, let's try to develop this inner awareness of just noticing where it is that we create these images within the mind of how things should be, what the outcomes should be, how people should behave, how things should work out. That is an image we are creating. Even the weather, we create an image of what the perfect weather day should be. And then when it's not like that, we get disgruntled because we've created that image. So I hope it's becoming a little bit clearer today. There's one last aspect that I would like to touch on, and this is also very deep. There's the example of two trains that are next to each other in the train station. And I've had this experience, and perhaps you have too, that you start to feel that your train is moving. But after a short while, you realize it's not your train. It's actually the other train that started to move, that gives the illusion that actually your train is moving. And Mike says that this is an important illusion and an important analogy for us. He says that as the spiritual being, we are always still and fixed within ourselves. That we look at the story of life and we get this same illusion that we are moving with the story of what's happening in our lives. But in actual fact, the soul is always still. The story is moving. It's not that we are moving with the story. Is that clear? I hope that's clear. The analogy of the train is very useful. And why is this important for us? It's important because our practice of meditation is just this, to separate ourselves from the drama, the story of life, and realize that we are always in a still place. And if we can grasp this and we practice this in our meditation, we will be able to be that detached observer. And we will also start to become free from all those triggers of emotion that come at us during the day as a result of the images we are creating within ourselves, not out there, within ourselves. This puts the power in our hands, which is very beautiful. We will stop blaming. It's, I'm angry because he, she didn't do this and that. When we realize that we are creating all of these images within the mind, and then the emotion follows. So I'm going to close by reading the last paragraph of this insight. This is why the practice of meditation, while cultivating self-awareness, is essentially an exercise in realizing your stillness. Paradoxically, to the rational mind at least, your contribution to life will be something of great beauty when you are free of the illusion that you change and you know yourself as the still, unchanging self. You are stillness. That is why you are always still yourself, so to speak. In truth, it is impossible to be anything other than yourself. That means you never change. It means you may change identities, just as the body changes clothes. It means you may change identities, but the self, the you, the being of consciousness that you always are, never changes. You just fall under the spell, under the illusion that you change. Well, that is very profound and deep, something to think about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this session this morning. Quite a lot to absorb. And you're welcome to unmute, or if you would like to, type something in the chat, and we can look at that. Then we can have some meditation and experience this still inner self. So please feel free. So Neer is asking, which book is this? So this is this wonderful book, Being Yourself, by Mike George. And it really is a very in-depth exploration of what is the real self, but perhaps even more importantly, what is not real? What is a creation of our own mind in the images that we create of ourselves, of our relationships, of our possessions? Yeah. So here we have something in the chat. Let's have a look. Who am I really if I had to reincarnate into a new body? A question that I am thinking about to check how much I identify with this current body. Yeah, that's a very profound question. And of course, if you think about yourself as this consciousness, so in other words, everything in consciousness, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your beliefs, your attitudes, everything that really makes up you is what goes with you. Because it's not in the body. This is one of our great images that we project, is that we are the body. So nice comment, thank you. And then Debbie, if anyone remembers the movie Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams as the teacher, asked his students to stand on their desks to see the situation from a clearer angle. Very nice. Thank you, Debbie. Yes, the healthiest thing we can do is to step outside of our mind into the audience and look at what's happening on the screen of the mind. Very healthy. And Bianca, for myself, my soul is like an embryo in the mother. There is silent, still life. Beautiful. Just feel that stillness. Lovely, thank you. And is it Jenny? Very well expressed. Love analogy of the train and that we are always still. Don't invest in a white carpet. Invest in the soul. Lovely. And Sija, hi Sija. A very profound way of self-awareness and freeing oneself from all external influences. Oh, isn't it wonderful, this thought of being free? And, what are we free from? We are actually free from ego. We are free from attachment. And then we can be who we truly are, which is so beautiful. You know, the true self is the self without images. And there's nothing more beautiful than being that true self. For the self, but also for the world, there's nothing more beautiful to be the soul. And in the Brahma Kumaris, we had the wonderful dadis, our senior yogis, and we saw their lives free from attachment. And they just emanated love like no other love, without attachment, peace and purity and divinity. So, so beautiful. So thank you so much for your lovely input. It makes it so rich. And let's close now just with a short reflection. Let's try to capture some of these feelings of the true self, this elusive true self. So sit back comfortably wherever you are. And as we come to the close of this session, let us consolidate, remind ourselves that behind the images, all the images that we project on the screen of the mind and then project into our daily lives, behind all of that lies the true, original, divine self. So still, so silent. The being without an image. The being that is completely free. Free and able to respond to all situations, in all relationships, to respond from my inner truth. My real self. And that response will come from authentic love, devoid of attachment and the emotion that comes from attachment. To respond with that pure love, sometimes with compassion, sometimes with joy, from the depths of myself. And now, as we get ready to go into our day, let us take the true self, the observer, into our day and start to notice when we move away, when we start to create those images on the screen of the mind. Om Shanti. Thank you so much.